introduction. This Twitter space is actually going to be translated somehow into a podcast. So I would still share it to other people to listen to after now. So that means that there is no reason for me to wait or for us to wait. We can just start already since people are going to get an opportunity to basically listen to this later.
Okay.
Yeah. So how are you doing? And how is the weather over there today?
Hi, good. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. The weather is beautiful today here on the West
Mm,
Coast on Vancouver Island. It's sunny and not too hot, which I think is the perfect kind of day.
mm, mm. Yeah, it's sunny here too in Sweden. Just it's mild. Like we have a mixed weather here in Sweden. It can be sunny now, and the next moment is something else. So you really don't know what to get at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's beautiful there too.
Yeah. Okay, just for us to start, basically, as an introduction, the main goal of Open Source Story with Regina is basically for us to hear the stories of successful women within the open source ecosystem that can basically help other women that are coming up or struggling within the open source space to get their faith up. And
Hmm.
today, as an introduction, I'm so happy to have you here, Emma, just to give a brief of who you are. So, Emma is the principal TPM at Microsoft, and Emma has done quite a lot of work within the open source space. But currently, she's working within the open source program office at Microsoft. She's helping to build, empower, and activate developers, which is really interesting. Emma, once again, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for choosing to join me today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
inviting
you're
me.
welcome. So I was looking at your story, the programs you've done. I've been following you quite for over 3 years. Before I just why when I got into GNOME, I've been following your work and the programs you do within Microsoft, and that's been really, really inspiring. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get involved with open source? What's your story?
Oh, wow. So how did I get involved in open source? So it's actually kind of quite a journey. Specifically, I'd say that the way that I got involved in open source is really around two things: curiosity, so just wanting to understand how things
Mm,
worked, and community. But like tactically, I took a 1 year developer course. I wanted to become a programmer. I was actually in my late 20s by the time that I became a professional programmer. So I also encourage people not to think about this as something that needs to happen early on in their careers or their lives. And I was lucky enough to have my first job in a vendor shop which built custom solutions for really anyone.
mm,
But that our differentiator at the time, so the year that I'm talking about right now is like 2003, 2004, and it was our differentiator at the time as was to provide solutions built in open source. So there weren't a lot of vendor shops doing that type of development, and so it was really our pitch was, this is like lower. There's a lower cost to building solutions in
mm,
open source. There's the community aspect, and so it was really the early days. I got to be part of the movement early on, and I never really looked back. Although we still built different kinds of software, including proprietary or solely proprietary products. I just love the communities. So when I that's how I really got hooked. So I got started as a job, but I got hooked being part of
mm.
communities.
Yeah, and to speak more about communities, you've done quite a lot of work within community. One of the things that I feel that I've read about and I've had other interviewers talk about this is basically what really happens as a woman when you get into open source. And one of the questions I've had people ask, me and other people, other women as well, is how do you balance it? Um, More like there are situations that are very, very practical with us within open source. We know that open source is volunteer driven. For a woman that is looking to getting into open source, not everyone is lucky to be able to, get an open source project that is properly paid or something. But how do you get to balance your personal life, your career, and working within open source? How do you put everything together?
That's a great question. I think I defer back to the idea of curiosity. So, what you do or what I was doing in my paid role was interesting to me, whatever I was using to develop part of my paid job. But I was also curious about where technology was headed. So at the time, mobile development was just becoming on the scene a lot more, and that wasn't part of my job. And so I found that going to look for an open source project that was building mobile applications, like open mobile applications, was the way that I was able to satisfy my curiosity, but also build up my skill set to become more relevant. So I was able to advance in my career. I mean, that was almost accidental, but it's true that following your curiosity and thinking about where the future in technology is headed, that open source was always a great way. So it was a compliment. I never really had to find a way necessarily to balance it. I think if you're at the point where your contribution and your work in open source feels like a burden, then you're probably in the wrong open source project, or you're probably, it's time to think about what you're curious about and what you want to learn so that it feels like something that's adding value to your life. So I mostly felt that way. Occasionally I would, it would become too much, and it's easy, especially when you get very excited about an open source project, to burn out. So I'll say that it shouldn't feel like a burden, but you also have to be careful not to get too involved to the point where you're burning yourself out. So the way that I've balanced that is, I think, just learning that, taking steps back when I needed to, realizing that I need to prioritize my time, and just making sure that I'm still having fun.
So
Yeah.
you spoke about talking like your love for communities, from what I deduced, got you more, invested into the open source space. So
Mhm.
I wanted to know more about for women that are looking to coming into open source, or for those that possibly might be finding it difficult to find a place
Mhm.
within the open source ecosystem. What do you think, from your experience so far, that could help them become better contributors, better maintainers uh, of open source projects?
So I would say look for other women. First of all, look for projects that you see women in leadership roles, or whether the maintainer or they're people that are actively welcoming others. For me, that's a signal that those open source projects are empowering to women. So I think that's really important. I think definitely when I look back to when I got involved in open source, it was because of the visibility. And I can even give a specific example. When I started as a developer in Drupal, I saw Angie Byron, who is WebChick on Twitter. And I saw that she was a core committer in Drupal. She was giving talks. She was welcoming others. And I saw that kind of presence of, even though there was very few women at the time, I felt like, okay, there's a signal here that you can be successful even though you're underrepresented. There's a chance to be a participant here, and there's no guarantees every time, but it felt like a signal that I could trust in the beginning, and it turned out for me to be true. And I think the opposite is also true. If you don't see a lot of underrepresented people, whether that's gender diversity or racial
Mm,
diversity, or those sorts of things, and that is a signal to maybe like that might not be the best project to check
mm,
out right. You don't want to be the kind of the canary in the coal mine going in to see. So I definitely recommend that. And then just that, just looking at the tone in issues and pull requests, are people, yelling at each
mm,
other, or
mm,
are they being respectful? Is there a process? Is there a code of conduct? Is there code of conduct there, but does it look like people are the maintainers are actually enforcing it? Those kinds of things. It sounds like a lot of homework. It's not really. I think intuition is one of our
mm.
strongest senses. And I think, that's what I would say is listen to your intuition. If it feels off, then it
Mm.
is.
Yeah.
And it feels right, then, give it a try. I mean, that might be the place that you really become, reach your potential.
Mm,
So,
mm. I think that's what's is different from you to say this, and I really thank you so much. Intuition. Not everybody actually reason about intuition. Most people first think of read the code of conduct, try to understand what it feels like. But speaking from a place of intuition is like trusting your guts and going by what your gut is saying to you. And I think that's really a
yes,
very good thing. Um
yes.
then this basically takes me to the next question, and I'm thinking, are there things that we can do? Because you spoke about looking for women that have been in leadership position, and you give an example with where you were at Drupal. So I'm just thinking, are there things that we can do as women within the open source space that could help to support other women? Are they? Yeah.
Mhm. Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think that the people who have the most influence tend to be in leadership
Mm,
roles, and women in the leadership roles, whether they're, maintainer, or they have like triage access, or they're part of a committee, or, leader can also be a word that people don't like. I don't mean
mm,
boss, right? I mean like someone with influence. If women with influence in open source projects, I think there's a responsibility to kind of reach over to others that are just getting started. And I mean, this is a responsibility of
yes,
everyone,
everyone.
honestly,
Yeah.
no matter what they're doing. But I think the special thing maybe that women can do for other women is to create safe
Yeah.
spaces. We have conversations uh, that where someone new to a project, or who might be struggling, can have an open and honest conversation about maybe some of the things they're experiencing, or that they're worried about, or that they're feeling doubt in themselves. I think that is something that women can do for other women, is have those safe spaces, and to kind of demonstrate that we are women, or we are, underrepresented in these communities, but we are developers and we are technologists, and
Mm,
that is the
mm,
forefront of who we are in these communities, right? I always remember sometimes, uh, I'll give an example. I was in a hackathon once, and they separated the technical work from the design work, and I was assigned the design work. I was the only woman in the
mm,
group, and I thought, oh, you're giving this. And not that designers of women's work, but this is obviously they thought that I wasn't able to do the
mm,
technical part. And I thought, and that's when it occurred to me, oh, it's because I'm a woman. They've probably given me this. And I always sometimes I'm surprised by that, because I think of myself as a
mhm.
technologist foremost, right? So helping women think, be successful without having to, as technologists
Yes,
first.
yes. I think that's it. I think one of the things that struck me was that you said is that it's a job for every one of us, and helping other
Mhm.
people with your story. I mean, someone is going to listen to this podcast and they will be glad that they hear you say this. At least it doesn't seem odd for whatever it is that they are going through, which is one of the
Mhm.
reason why. I chose to start the Open Source Stories Regina. So I was thinking, like you spoke about having to have, we know we are underrepresented, right? We know we
Mhm.
are not, research has shown that. And what we see in conferences is enough to let us know that we don't have so much women within, the open source ecosystem, right? And having for us to
Yeah.
support ourselves is one thing. Creating a safe space is another thing. What do you think that within projects, what can they do better to support women?
So in some research that
Mm,
I've done working with, I've specifically done some work around helping women achieve maintainer level
mm,
roles, and for women who are already in their careers, who are you know, mothers in some cases, like how do we how do they step into those roles? Because one of the problems with open source historically has been this idea that you have to prove yourself,
yeah.
right? Like you have to start and then you have to prove yourself and then all these things. But the fact is there's many, many women that are able to step into like a leadership role right away. So I think one of the things that projects can do is to document very like publicly in the repository what types of roles, leadership roles, roles with influence, whatever you want to call them, that they need, and the criteria for
Mm,
that, and also the way that people can reach out to apply for those. So I've seen especially just underrepresented people in repositories trying to prove themselves, trying to have that
mm,
visibility, but others just really easy, like that are of the more of the majority demographic, being the majority of who gets
mm.
those roles. So I think what I'm trying to say is it needs to be publicly
Yes.
documented in a repository how to step into those roles. The Chaos Project has the inclusive leadership metrics, which goes into detail about how a project can
Mm-hmm.
do that. And I suggest that any project that wants to be more inclusive to women start with the inclusive leadership metric.
Yes, I think referencing the chaos projects I feel like when it has to do with inclusivity, like you said, metrics is key, right? That's the only way we can basically measure how well you're doing and how you can improve. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gradually winding down to basically our more like last questions. Is there anything you're working on at the moment, personally or within your role, that you think you like to speak about?
Um, Let me think about that. There's probably a couple of things that I'm working on. I have my professional role at Microsoft where I help projects and maintainers and teams think more strategically and empathetically about open
Mm,
source. So that's one thing. But I'm also part of the Chaos Project community, which I've already mentioned, which is a great
yeah.
community. And I really love and am experimenting with the ways that we can use data to tell stories that motivate people to change. So, for example, I mean, much like security in open source, it's really hard, and you'll probably never hear someone say, well, you
Mm,
might, but that they don't care about diversity and inclusion. They don't think it's
mm,
important. But getting them to work on
mm,
it, to do something about it, is an entirely other level.
mm,
So the way that this intersects with data and metrics, I think, is if you can show with data the number of people that are interacting with your project and from the different regions. I know we have to watch out for personally identifying information, but if you can show a maintainer, like, look, if you make this small change, let's check again in 2 months just to see if that has resulted in more pull requests or more participation from other regions of the country, or and so I don't have all I definitely don't have all
yeah.
the answers, but I think that can you hear
Yeah, I
me?
can hear you very well.
Oh, okay, sorry. So that's something I'm experimenting with is how do we use data to motivate
Mm,
people, right? It's not just like, oh, do this thing, like I sometimes I feel like maintainers think it's a
yeah.
chore. Oh, I'm already swamped. I have all these issues in progress open. Now you want me to do like create all these things and and I don't understand that. And that's just gonna make everyone feel good, I
Mhm.
guess. But by using data and metrics to show the progress over time, I think that gives folks the aha moments that they need, that they realize, hey, wait a minute, this is meaningful, this is important, and I can tell the story of that. So I think the Chaos Project is a
Yeah.
really important one there. That's something I'm working on. And the other thing that I'm involved in is Canada's Open Government Stakeholder
Yeah, I
Forum.
saw that.
Yeah, and I'm just an advisor there. I'm really interested in how open can enable, justice,
Wow.
citizen action, and empowerment. Especially with a lot of the disinformation in the world. So I'm really proud and excited to be helping Canada think about how to be more open, transparent, and successful in enabling citizens
Mm.
movements. So that's the other thing that I'm
Yeah,
working
I
on.
read I read about that on your post, and it was really, really interesting to see that you basically helping the Canadian government. That is really good. I mean, um, having to have you there is another thing that is motivating, and that basically takes me
Mm.
to more. I would say second to my last question. Well, second to the last question. Sorry. As somebody's gonna come back to this space to listen to this, might be a woman that is finding our footing within the open source space, looking for when you started your contribution in open source up until now. What advice would you give to a younger person coming into open source at the moment?
I would say that you are smart enough, you are talented enough, and any project would be lucky to have you
Mhm.
there. Don't let imposter syndrome, which is really just the systemic, racism, sexism over the years. That's what imposter syndrome is. It's not you. Don't, you are worthy and you are smart enough. And so I know that's really hard sometimes to personalize and to believe, but it's
Mhm.
true. And you will find that you will come back and say, "Oh, Emma was right. I was smart enough, and I can be successful." But you have to again listen to your intuition, follow your curiosity, and you will get there. Open source can be a great place to learn and to grow and to have fun, honestly.
Mhm.
But don't be discouraged. Don't let the signals of others tell you otherwise.
Wow, this is really great. I interviewed someone, I mean, last week, and she stated that one of the reason she got into open source because she thought that she was not good enough. And
Mm.
so this is real. This is real advice out there. Thank you so much, Emma. So I promised you
Thank you so
30
much.
minutes, and I wouldn't want to take more than your time. I don't know if Adibola, do you have any question for Emma before we wrap up? If you have a question, you can make a request. Do you have any question for Emma before we wrap up? Okay, I would be waiting for that. And so, Emma, finally, can people reach out to you? Because I get it. I get this thing like, okay, we have listened to this interview and we feel like speaking to her or basically reaching out to her. Are you open to anyone that listens to this interview? I want to ask you further questions.
If you are someone who is underrepresented in technology and open source, I am more than happy for you to reach out and to chat with you and to see how I can help. My door is always open. I'm not always on Twitter, but on my profile, I have my Mastodon link and also my LinkedIn profile, and also yeah, so you can reach me any of those ways.
Yes. Thank you so much. Just to wrap up, I'm creating this project on GitHub, so I'll be sharing that link as well, just in case you get a message from me. And then finally, I would
Okay.
also be sharing with you a more like a greeting card, just saying thank you for attending Open Source Stories, Regina. You get that on LinkedIn. And
So,
thank you so much. I really, really learned a lot from this. And I'm sure listeners that will be coming back to the space or will be looking at the or be coming back to the podcast, they will also have a good time. Thank you so much, Emma, and have a lovely evening.
oh, thank you. You as well. It's a
Yeah.
pleasure. Thanks. You're very inspiring. I
Thank you
appreciate
so much.
your
Yeah,
time.
bye.
Take care. Bye.